Okay, this is 2 o'clock. I think we can start. I'm sure some more people will join us on the way. First, thank you for joining on Europe's Day to discuss the importance of the upcoming European elections. For higher education and research. I mean, obviously for us, this is a very important topic. We have participants from 51 countries, so welcome to all. And I'm Christelle Vasselet, I'm the Communications Director here at EUA, the European University Association. I will be moderating this webinar today, and we have a range of speakers that will address the topic. First, a few practical matters. This webinar is recorded, and you will receive the recordings afterwards via email. You can also watch all our webinars on our YouTube channel, which is the EUA one, so easy to find. Since we have a lot of participants today, we expect a lot of questions. Please use the chat for those. You can just write them as we go along, and I will pick up as many as we can. Then, before completely diving into the topic, I would like to explain a couple of things that appear on this first slide that you see in front of you. The first hashtag, this time I'm voting, is actually the hashtag of the campaign that the European Parliament is leading to increase the participation at those elections. It's a grassroots campaign, and the European University Association is one of the 60 associations who are part of that campaign to boost participation. So the webinar is also part of this. You have more information on our website if you're interested in this. The other hashtag, the EU elections 2019, that's the political hashtag where you will find a lot more information about the debates and about the candidates and everything around the elections per se. So, beyond that now, I think we can jump into the topic itself. We have first with us Thomas Jorgensen, my colleague here at the European University Association, and he's going to discuss a little bit the impact of the European Parliament on European policy investment related to universities. It will be followed by Katrina Koppel, the Vice President of the European Student Union, on their Vote for Education campaign and the importance of the young voters' engagement. Just to have an idea, we have 20 million students voting for those elections, so they are really a big demographic in those elections. And then we will finish with Brikena Xhomaqi, who is the director of the Lifelong Learning Platform, and address issues that are broader about education in general, and especially informal and non-formal education. And then we will, of course, follow with as many questions as we can take, as I mentioned earlier. First, we will ask you to do something. If you can fill this survey that should appear in front of you, just to have an idea of who you are. This will be very practical for our presenters to understand who they are addressing. Just wait a little bit. I see that 2/3 of people are already on thread. Thank you all. Almost there. Okay, we see that anywhere roughly half of you are working in a higher education institution as staff member. We have a few students. Welcome to them, and 10% academic. Okay, perfect. And a few journalists, I think, was also on the list. Okay, well, I think that's interesting for our panelists to know how to answer your questions. Then, without much further ado, I will leave Thomas to start his presentation.
Good. Thank you very much, Christelle. And welcome to all of you. I can see that there are people from literally all over the world that signed up for this, so that is very, very nice. And I'm going to take you through the really basics of how the Parliament works, and then the main areas where it's really interesting for higher education and for research. So a few words on what kind of institution this is. It sounds a little bit negative. It approves a lot. It can propose relatively little, but it's an important thing to remember that the Parliament approves things that are proposed elsewhere. It does not propose new laws or new regulation like that, and that makes it work a little bit different for many parliaments than are elsewhere in Europe and elsewhere in the world. The constitutional setup, so how it works with other bodies, is also slightly different because the European Union is not a federal state. So the parliament has to work with the commission, which is a government or civil service, and with the member states that sit in the council. And there's these three bodies that need to have a particular dance together that is different from many national seats. Just saying this because often people can assume that the European Parliament works like some national parliaments that they're used to, and particularly those of us that come from political systems where the philosophy is nothing above and nothing next to the parliament. That is a very different thing. But what does that mean concretely? We have one very important power of the parliament is that they have a say on the money. And at the moment, of course, we're discussing where the money is going to go for the next 7 years in Brussels. And the parliament has traditionally been a big spender, more of everything. But they have been particularly a friend of research and higher education. We can see that also in the yearly budgets, where this is very clear from the parliament that they want to use more money there than the commission and even than the member states, which are paying at the end of the day. So they tend to be a little bit more careful about how the money is spent. Let's put it like that. And you can see that. So for the next 7 years, the parliament has proposed 120 billion for the research program. That is 20% more than the commission has proposed. And the overall expectation is that the member states are going to be more careful, let's say, than the commission. For Erasmus, well-known, very popular program with everybody, it's triple budget. Not Brikena will say we should of course have 10 times Erasmus, but triple, it's still a considerable support. What is important to remember, and I'll come back to this when we look at, let's say, the future composition of the parliament, is that the initiatives for research and higher education have been approved by huge majorities. So you can see here the illustration is from the vote about the Erasmus program. And you have 527 votes for. That is across all parties. You go through the voting list and you will find communists, French Front National nationalists, and you find not everybody, but somebody from all the parties have actually voted for this. So this is very clear. When you look at the research program, it's similar. It's the same picture. You have this very broad left to right support for these issues in the parliament. And that is corresponded with a broad understanding by the parliament that these issues are actually important for Europe and that Europe can really do a difference here. When it comes to regulation, and this is probably what most of us think about when we think about a parliament, this is where laws are made. This is where we get legislative proposals. Now, the parliament, as I said before, can of course not propose regulation, but there are also other limits to it. There's of course the limits to what is a European competence, and particularly for education. And I know that Brikena will talk more about the area of education, what the parliament does, because you can do other things than regulation, but the parliament does not have a competence, or the EU does not have a competence, so the parliament will not vote on regulations on education. Theoretically, you could imagine that you would have laws about research that would be voted in the European Parliament. But the European Commission that proposes these laws have traditionally, it has not been using regulation for research policies. Research policies have largely been driven through money. And There's no reason to speculate whether this will be different in the future, but in the past, that has been the case. So there's been very little direct regulatory power of the Parliament. However, some rules that we care a lot about, the rules that decide how the different programs are made, those are approved by the Parliament, and the Parliament amend, and there's a very serious contribution from the Parliament to those. For the present Parliament and for the rules for the next 7 years, that work has largely been done. Those were the votes I talked about on the last slide. So there the Parliament has a power. What we might see is also that you have power about things that affect universities without being directly research or education related laws. And the big colorful battle we had last year was of course about the copyright directive, where UA and a lot of partners have been very active in arguing for copyright that was helpful for open access, for instance. So there you have something that really is relevant for universities. You might think that with the big role that technology is going to play and is playing in our societies, that you might have regulation that touches upon that, and that would then again touch upon universities. You might also think about things like state aid that is more connected to the internal market that could touch universities, and there, since this is a real regulation, the Parliament would have a say, would need to approve and be engaged in the process. So that's the regulation part. The, let's say, last part, if that slide is going to show. There we go. I put here symbolic action, and it looks like it doesn't have an effect. That it's more the power of the Parliament to put things on the agenda. And that could be through resolution, so things that does not have necessarily a legal consequence, but where you put things, say, the European Union should act in this way, we call upon the member states to do this or to do that. And one very timely example is from last year, a resolution about taking into account academic freedom in foreign policy that was then supported by an event in Brussels about academic freedom together with Scholars at Risk. Our Secretary General was also at that event talking, and that I think is a good example of something that Parliament can do, and they can put a thing on a topic on the agenda. You can do that through public hearings and events as well, to invite experts, invite politicians to put a topic on the European agenda, put, let's say, moral pressure on other parts of Brussels. And you can question the commissioners directly. And I just took two questions that are taken from real life to show what kind of questions those are. So, what is done for disadvantaged students in Erasmus? And then the commissioner will have to tell, well, we do this and we do that, and these are the statistics. And that is an official answer. That can be very technical questions. What is done to reduce error rates in Horizon 2020? That is a real question. And then you have the commissioner that stands and say, well, we did this and we did that, and these are the results of it. So that's another way to put political pressure on politicians outside the Parliament. The Parliament evaluates the programs. It's not in a legal way, but they have these interim evaluations. How are programs working? There was obviously both of the Erasmus and Horizon 2020. And that is, of course, if the Parliament says this doesn't work at all, that is, of course, a strong hint that something needs to be changed for the next time, even though that they cannot stop something in the middle of the process. And then, importantly, the Parliament approves the Commission, approves the President and the Commission. They actually made a very good infographic if somebody is interested in the intricacies of how that is done. That is, of course, going to be hugely relevant in the fall to see who's going to be the president of the next commission and who are going to be the commissioners. That is what we all look for. And there is a process where the Parliament has to approve who is the next commission. And you can see that I think we will have if we can put either in the mail or in the chat the link to that infographic. So the last thing is the crystal ball. Is how is it going to look? And we realize that there's of course a lot of let's say drama about this election. This is a turning point for Europe, and it's a very critical phase, and it is. And there's no reason not to vote because you think it's not that. But it's also important to see what is likely to happen. And we just look at the projections, and I took some fairly standard projections here. And we assume that this is with the Brits. So it's 751 if somebody wonders. It's 751. The chair, the president of the parliament is not in here. But the main point is, if you see how the parliament is today on the left, you can see, if it might be possible to see, that the light blue and the red have a majority together. So the Conservatives and the Social Democrats have a majority together. And that, I believe, they had for the whole history of the European Parliament. And this is likely to change. Now, is this going to be a very dramatic change? That it remains to be seen. There was, at the beginning of the present Parliament, there was a very formal grand coalition where they would, these two parties would have a close coordination. That was cancelled a couple of years ago by the Social Democrats. Say we won't do it anymore, at least not formally. So we already have a situation where, yes, there is two parties can make a big and stable majority, but as you've seen also in the earlier slides, you can have majorities that are much larger than that. But that is going to be one difference. The other difference that a lot of people will talk about is that the Eurosceptic wing, which is here presented on the extreme right, and is going to be bigger. And that most projections will say that it is going to be bigger. That does not mean that it's anywhere near a majority. The two main parties, the Social Democrats and the Conservatives, and the Liberals and the Greens that are, let's say, more mainstream and pro-Europe generally, they still have a very comfortable majority. But, and this has to be said as well, I'm being run through, the majorities, these parties don't vote as blocks. They vote with many individuals, and that means that many of the right-wing parties will sometimes also vote, and as we've seen with Erasmus and with the Western Europe, will actually also vote for things that are European. So I'll cut it there. Continue.
Yeah, I do apologize. I have to cut my colleague because Katrina is with us for a short time, so I want to make sure that she's able to do a presentation with us. Bear with me, Katrina. Just put your mic on and your presentation on so that you're ready to go. It's okay.
I'm ready to go.
It's your turn. Yeah, it's your turn. We're all go.
Hi, happy to be here. Greetings from Sofia. I am indeed with you today for a bit of a shorter time. I am at the European Students' Union General Assembly at the moment, and ran away from my duties as Vice President to be with you here and talk to you a little bit about what we are doing for the European Parliament elections and how we see the connection between European Parliament elections and education in Europe. So to get started, because I don't just assume that everyone knows what ESU, or European Students' Union, is. We are the umbrella organization of said 20 million students that were mentioned in the beginning of this webinar. We represent 45 members from 39 countries, meaning we have quite a wide scope of membership, from Portugal to Israel, from Cyprus to Iceland. And we have been doing this since 1982. So we're a bit over 30 years old. So do we do campaigning for European Parliament elections? Yes, of course we do. we do political representation as our daily job, and therefore the parliament elections fall squarely within what we do anyway. However, does ISO as an umbrella organization do campaigning for that is geared towards specific members of European Parliament? Do we do specific campaigning that on a national level? No, that is things that our members do. So, for example, in Finland and in Ireland, we are supporting the campaigns that are being run by our local unions and therefore standing for whatever it is they're standing for. Usually it is quite simply the goal of getting students to go to vote. But a very good example here is the Finnish students' campaign from this year and a few years ago, in which they made politicians running for elections promise certain things about the election, not the elections, education, and then followed up on those promises, especially when those promises were not kept. So, for example, on the EU level, that would mean that European Parliament members promised to join the CULT committee, for example, which is the European Parliament committee that makes the most important decisions regarding education, including Erasmus regulation. And if that promise is then broken, the students get quite upset, all 20 million of them. So we do campaign. We have our own campaign that we run on, unfortunately, a very low budget, as we as students do not tend to be the wealthiest part of the society. You can find our campaign when you Google #VoteForEducation. It is essentially one of the first results. So what is it that we actually ask for when we campaign? In the end of the past year, we decided and passed a statement that is also visible when you Google said #VoteForEducation. What we set as our biggest priority is inclusive higher education in Europe. Now, we had quite a bit of not, I would say disagreement, but consultation amongst ourselves on education in European Union is quite a difficult topic. It's a national competence. There is only so much that the European Union can do, as was just talked about by the previous presenter, meaning we have to tread a very careful line between asking for things in education, but also we do not have the goal of wanting education to be governed by the European Union, because what really scares us about that prospect is that European Union and its views and actions on education often are very focused on employability. And we stand for this, that higher education is not only for employability. Of course, it's a part of it, but training for jobs, training for skills, training for employability is only a part of higher education, but unfortunately the part that gets focused on the most. So when we talk about inclusive higher education, for example, we talk about European Parliament funded projects such as Erasmus, but not only. One of the key things that we ask for is that all projects run by the European Union must be accessible to all, with particular focus on students with disabilities who are very underrepresented in Erasmus. According to some of the most recent research, represent only 0.17% of all students. And that is not, of course, the total of people with disabilities in society. So while we want the diversity of higher education to reflect the diversity of society, we also want the international mobility within higher education to represent that diversity. And right now, students with disabilities and other marginalized groups do not have the same access. What we also ask for is access to education for migrants, both of refugee and non-refugee backgrounds. If you want to know more about this, we have a very lovely project where we, as the umbrella of student unions, gave a small grant to local student groups who want to engage with migrants who are seeking access to education. You can Google "Together Moving Forward" and find much more about what we do for access to education for refugee and non-refugee backgrounds. Of course, this topic is very relevant, especially in the context of EU, as dealing with migration is one of the core topics that has been and will be, and is one of the, according to polls, one of the most prioritized topics among European citizens. Excuse me. What we also focused on a lot is academic and press freedom. Now, why we put academic freedom and press freedom together is that these often go together, especially in our experience. So when we look at cases from the recent past when either journalists or journalism students have been murdered for their work, for their investigative work, this is in direct, this goes directly against for what we believe in, both academics and students' rights to free research. I mean, I guess asking for academic freedom isn't something that I have to overly explain to you as the attendees of this webinar. I'm guessing you know pretty much exactly what I'm talking about. We also request high quality and sustainably funded higher education. This is a wider topic of several sort of sub-themes. For example, here we request that European Union does not push for tuition fees, which we see as fundamentally unsustainable ways of funding higher education. I mentioned in the beginning of my slideshow here that students are not the richest part of the society. Therefore, expecting students to fund their own way through higher education in both the sense of tuition fees and not giving them enough grants to live is a fundamentally unsustainable way of funding higher education, because it is dependent on the poor people of the society to fund their own way, which often is backed by loans which are not very favorable for students. We also talk here about quality and quality assurance. Recently, the European Commission released a recommendation on automatic recognition among European universities. There is also the question of the European universities, I think alliance they're called right now, not network anymore, which is sort of essentially right now a pilot project, but an increasing push towards more transnational universities, more transnational cooperation between universities. What really worries us is that the conditions and the ideas behind this seem to be quite elitist to us, meaning that it's the alliances of the best, not necessarily in the sense of quality or student accessibility, but in the sense of research, which is often very connected to funding, state funding. This means that we are very concerned that some of the European initiatives might lead to more elitism, more privilege gaps within higher education, which we are firmly standing against. These are briefly the ways that we are working with the European Parliament elections. What we've been also doing is we've had a lot of panel discussions in various events, trying to engage students, trying to get students who are not the activists, because they're going to vote anyway. We're trying to get the students who are the students from the corridor, as we call them in Estonian. We're trying to get the students who are doubting whether their voice matters. And we're also trying to get the youth who are doubting whether their voice matters, because students or youth are like the Venn diagram of life. Not all students are young, and not all young people are students. So us, the European Youth Forum, and other various NGOs, including OBESU, who represents the secondary school students, are working to make sure that every one of the young people, of the students who has the right to vote, sees the point of going to vote. I've also had here to the last slide a little illustration of some of the materials that we've been used for campaigning. This is our current elected team of us who are all very happy to work with European elections. However, some of these people do not actually have the right to vote. For example, we do have members who are here who are from Belarus and from Armenia, but they are all still very motivated to convince the young people of Europe, of the European Union, who do have the right to vote, that they should vote. So I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Katrina. That was very clear indeed. So I just have one question before we let you go, because I know how busy you are. But I mean, we know through European surveys that that students are actually among the most supportive groups in the population towards the EU. Nevertheless, they are among the ones who vote the least in elections. Do you think it will be different this time? Do you really feel that with all the effort that you have put into it will be bring to friction, or do you feel that there is that it's very difficult to make people move?
I mean, frankly, it is quite difficult. It's difficult for everyone. Otherwise, we probably would have much higher percentages of people going to vote. So that comes back to the core issue that I mentioned in the sort of end slides, that while youth and students are often very European-minded, they have grown up with the European Union. Often they take it for granted, which is also an issue, but they don't feel like their vote matters because young people are the minority age group who goes to vote. Young people often are seen as too inexperienced or but quite simply too young to go to vote, even if they are of age and have the right to vote. In countries, for example, in Austria, as people who are 16-year-olds old can now also participate in elections, and still there is the stigma that young people somehow matter less in elections. I think that is a huge factor that deters people from voting.
Okay. Now I think we will definitely agree on that. I just have a last question, then I'll let you go from the floor. Someone is asking, how do you motivate those people, those students from the corridor, as you call them, not aware of the cult committee or how the EU is preparing to vote? And that's a real question for all of us. How do you make it concrete? Do you have perhaps one example of how you made it concrete to students?
I mean, the best example is explaining to them that, do you know what Erasmus is? Have you been on a mobility? Do you know how that came to be? Who votes for that? And do you know that there are people who do not see this as a sensible thing for the EU to do? I think from the EU side, there definitely is a lack of communication towards people to explain what EU is. I think it's been written in various research papers as well, that the communication of the European Union has led to a situation where often the people who are the most European-minded also take it the most for granted. And I think going down to the little bits of why it is important that you engage, why, if you don't engage, what can happen? I think these are the things that are going to motivate people to vote.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Katrina. I'll leave you and I wish you good luck for the rest of your meeting.
Thank you very much.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, excellent. So we are going to change presenter now and go to Brikena. I'm going to allow her to speak and to be seen. Just bear with us 1 minute. Not even. Hi, Brikena. Can you hear us properly? Sorry, I turned your mic off. And you should be on now.
And
you're on.
Now?
Yes, you're fine. You can speak. Everyone can hear you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to you as well. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Christelle, as well, for the opportunity. Well, I have to make you aware of the fact that I'm next to the sea, so you will hear the noise. It's usually a nice one that people look forward, so I hope you don't mind. I really thank you for this opportunity, and I think maybe I would also do the boring part just for those that maybe don't know who I am and who is the platform I represent. So I'm Brikena, the director of the Lifelong Learning Platform, which is the European Civil Society for Education. What does that mean? It means that we are an umbrella of umbrellas, European network of European networks that represent different sectors of education, from early childhood education to adult education. And that's it's a very wide network that promotes indeed formal, non-formal and informal education. So one of our main missions, I would say, is how to break the silos between different sectors of education and how to have a holistic vision of education. So with this, one of the main objectives that we have is to promote democratic and inclusive education systems. Now, I would elaborate on that a little bit more, but I want to just comment a bit on what Thomas and Katrina said about education not being a European competence. This is an excuse, obviously it's true, but it's also often an excuse that we abuse of. Especially European institutions would tend to say that very often, and member states as well, saying that no, but this is not an EU competence, so we can do more than that. However, I think we forget that in the Lisbon Treaty, we do have an article that does specify the need for further cooperation between education establishments and institutions. It's in the article number 165 of the functioning of the European Union, and it does specify the need for further cooperation at EU level in the education sector. Now, what does it mean? It's maybe very broad, but it does give an input, a possibility, a window for the education sector to work and for Europe to provide some soft recommendations and opinions to the member state and help them cooperate in the field. And I think Erasmus is one of the main mechanisms that the European Union has managed very well to help in that regard and intervene in a certain, under brackets, in the education, mostly in higher education, but it's more and more now in school education and adult education as well. There is a lot happening through cooperation, through projects of strategic partnerships, through different actions of the program, and also the European Social Fund has supported the member states to implement major reforms in their education systems. So I would say when the union wants and when the institutions want, they can do something. There is always a gatekeeper, which is the member states, but also institutions. Sometimes they can be gatekeepers. But I do believe that we can be a little bit more positive about what the union can do in the field. And I mean, we can just focus on what happened at the Gothenburg summit. There was a renewed pressure and renewed energy for education and also renewed goals, very, very ambitious goals on a European level, and how education can actually support the social pillar and the European rights social pillar. And I think that gives us a window of possibilities to further work on the education at EU level. So I think there is a lot of pressure there. Now, we as a platform, we obviously work in that directions. We are not pushing the union to intervene, but at least to help that cooperation through funding or possibilities that the union has. And there are many working groups, thematic working groups that you know as well, in different sectors of education, where the union is trying to help the member states together to exchange and learn from each other in order to progress. And one of the most relevant for today, maybe, discussion is the one that is followed of the Paris Declaration, which was the working group focusing on citizenship, but now is focusing on promoting common values and inclusive education. And in that one, there is a lot of work going on how and what role education plays to promote those values. And it's true that there are many steps, and there are many, barriers to overcome for education sector to be able to promote those common values, because first we have to identify those values. And we were recently in a peer learning activity in Croatia about this specific topic. And one of the major issues that came in the discussion was that actually we have to, in order to promote these values, and in order to promote citizenship and active participation, we need to rethink the way we teach history, for example. European countries have very different, sometimes conflicting histories. And the way we are teaching them at schools is yet not to the level that allows full tolerance towards each other. You can take the Balkans as an example, but I'm pretty sure that remaining issues are also in other parts of the Union. This to say that there are a lot of steps for us to be able to build democratic education systems. And what I wanted to add to that as well is that the role that education plays, it's key, not because only it's the place where we learn those values, or we will learn about life and society, but also because should and is the place where we practice them. Only 2 weeks ago, we had a discussion in the Parliament when it comes to the technical and professional higher education institutions, what role they can play as well in this EU elections and in general. And it was mentioned during the discussion that I was also a student representative, and I refer to this as well. The participations of students in the students' elections at the university are very low. So the problem already starts from there. A lot of students do not know how to vote. A lot of students do not vote. Only 10%, more or less, average vote in the local, in the university level elections. So it starts there. The role that the education has to play, it starts there from the practice. Where do we practice democracy? Because if we practice it at our local small community or our university, our school, we learn how to practice it at EU level as well. And I think if we don't believe on those at this level, it's much more harder to believe on those at the EU level. And I do agree with Katrina saying that the Union can do more in promoting the values of the Union and promoting what the Union is doing and the great achievements. But I think also that there are so many different channels that the Union has made has put at the disposal of the member states to promote those things. But the gatekeepers are often at that level, national, or probably sometimes at the institutional level as well. So I do think that while the Union can do more, institutions can also do more. And they can do more, but also cooperating better or more with different stakeholders. So I really believe that this cannot be just done by the European Union. It has to be done by the different stakeholders in the education system. They have to promote as well those values. And they have to allow to practice those values. They have to inform more, to raise awareness about them. So I think there is a lot that can be done at the institutional level, and education is really at the heart of building the democratic society, and the Union cannot neglect the role of education in that regard. I can elaborate forever on the topic, but I feel like it's better I stop here for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Brikena. I've got a question for you because you were among the leaders of the 10 times Erasmus campaign, which was aiming at multiplying the budget of the Erasmus program 10 times. More or less, we can expect the budget to triple, as Thomas said. But what do I mean? Obviously, it's a big difference from what you wanted, but still, what kind of difference will it make in your sector? What do you think you're going to achieve with a bigger budget?
With 10 times?
Yes, if you want to make the comparison.
Okay, I mean, the campaign obviously came after the different claims of a few states of the, I mean, heads of the states, the Italian one, and also the Juncker a few years ago at the 30th anniversary did say that we need a 9 times ambitious program. Did not say the budget, but we took it as ambitious also financing. And the Italian member state said that, well, we need 10 times more money for Erasmus as well. So we took on that, and we started our campaign with 10 different arguments, and we thought that 10 times bigger the budget, we would be able to achieve much more, because at the moment, the contribution of the program, I mean, overall, Erasmus just gets, if doubling, it will get 30 billion. That's nothing. That's not even 1% of the EU budget, if you think about it. But the pressure on education is so high that that was our argument. If everyone is speaking about education or blaming education for all the issues that the Union or our member states have, then why don't we put more money for it at the EU level? So with more money, we would be able to increase the participation of more people from different areas, not only the capital cities. We would be able to improve the social dimension, the social inclusion. Today, only people that can afford can actually participate, or people that have support, additional support from the member states can participate. like Katrina said, people with disabilities have a major barrier to participate. So I think this would be the two main things that will improve if we increase the budget. But also we can improve and we can increase the peer learning and the cooperation between education institutions, which currently is happening, but the demand is so much higher.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's a very clear example of that. We have received questions regarding voting age. Perhaps let's start with that, because it's actually, no, there is no European rules regarding voting age. So the fact that you can vote at 16 or 17 or 18, it's completely the responsibility of the member states on that. So that we can already put on the side. I see that Annalena, our colleague, is actually putting links to websites that can help finding more information. So that's useful. Now we have two other questions. One is about about non-EU citizens, researchers and scholars. So what kind of impact elections will have on them? And especially whether there will be restrictions on nationality citizenship of applicants of the funds if EU policy shift. So I guess here there's a fear of the parliament becoming more right-wing and potentially putting more barriers. I think that Thomas, you would like perhaps to take that question?
Yeah, I can definitely take that. I think as a fear, can and will the parliament tomorrow block this? No, that's not going to happen. First, because the legal framework of these programs is very much fixed, and there is, to my knowledge, no big differences in that. The second is that we had fairly recently a very lenient directive on third country students and researchers coming to Europe, with only two exceptions, Denmark and the UK. So probably soon only the exception of Denmark. And that gives very good possibilities for researchers to come to the EU, and students as well. Could it theoretically be changed if the Commission and the member states would want to change these things, or if the Commission and their I don't think I'm enough of a specialist in eligibility rules for the programs, but the short answer is tomorrow, no. Can the Parliament make consistent pressure on Europe for the European funding for the Europeans, a Europe first approach to the programs? Yes. And that we've seen already in the Horizon Europe debate, that there were parliamentarians and not from the nationalist groups that argued for that. So you could have a slow pressure to change the very open nature, for instance, of the research program. But it's not something that's going to happen immediately. If it happens, and I doubt it, it will be a slow change.
Okay. In terms of stronger Erasmus policy and Bologna process, I think here there was a question about the equivalence between diploma or recognition of diplomas. Can we expect a better harmonization in the future, especially in a time when students are pressured to study abroad? Is it something you're working on, Brikena, recognition? Diploma recognition, because you're working a lot in validation of formal and informal learning, but I don't know if you would like, otherwise we can.
Yeah, well, actually, I mean, yesterday we were for 2 days in Berlin to discuss validation of prior learning, and we are a member of the European Qualifications Framework Advisory Group as well, so we follow all the recognition issues closely as well, and obviously we believe that's at the heart of the mobility and better mobility in Europe and globally. We do expect better recognition. Member states are reporting on the progresses they are also doing in standardizing and harmonizing to a certain extent, or at least following certain guidelines, but still trying to keep a customized approach to the needs of their learners or institutions. There is progress, at least at the reform and policy level that we can see from our level. However, when we ask as civil society, our members, so the actual users, the perception is much lower on the implementation of those reforms. Or yeah, the wish is much, the expectations are much higher, but the perception on what is done so far are very low. So I think there is a lot to be done there. Validation is one of the biggest area to work on as well, because it has been left a bit behind compared to the recognition issues in the Bologna process, which I think has progressed much better and faster. Now, I don't know how concretely, I mean, what concretely the question would like to know is if the union would like to harmonize. I mean, I can't tell that. The intention is there to at least be in accordance with the European qualifications framework. That would be already a good step if all member states will be fully set with that. And that will mean some kind of harmonization. But I can't predict the future from ours. Of course, we will push for better and more, at least transparency. That will help a lot. I mean, with maybe Europass as well, revision would be an additional point. So that's definitely something the Commission is investing a lot, and will most probably support the better recognition, or at least transparency.
Okay, thank you, Brikena. Thomas, you would like to add something?
I think, of course, the Parliament could exert pressure to make things better, because we know they can be better. But some of the problems are not actually legal or funding problems. They are problems in the way that recognition is sometimes used at the national level, and the transparency and the information that you give. We have a whole report about this that could be taken out from our website. We had a short article, I think, by one of our colleagues under Expert Voices, where I think you can find this as well on our website. But it is a problem that goes widely beyond the European Union. But again, they can put pressure.
We can put pressure. Yeah, exactly. Okay, I think we're going to finish with our last questions. There was the last question was, with the new Parliament, is there a possibility for changes in the partial agreement on Horizon Europe? Because as perhaps some of you know, we have an agreement with the European Parliament on principle on the new programs. But of course, with the new Parliament, what could happen? Thomas, would you like to?
In the wild universe, yes, but in reality, no. It was voted, I think, with 550 votes in favor. So you'd have to move 200 votes. And as I said, it was not that it was a partial vote. It was the whole spectrum of parties that voted for. So realistically, I think we can sleep soundly regarding the Horizon Europe.
Okay, and that's reassuring words from Thomas about the new Parliament. Then there's no open questions, so I think if anyone has a questions, they can ask now. Otherwise, we are going to close. Brikena, would you like to have a final word on those future elections or future parliaments? Like a 30 seconds closing statement about what you hope for the new, with the new parliament? I think, do you have a problem with your sound? You can't hear us.
I think I can't hear.
Can you hear me? I think we have lost Brikena.
Do you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Yes, you do.
Yes.
I don't, but I'm trying to. I don't know what happens.
Okay, and I leave Thomas to then to conclude on our side, and then if you can find us again. Thomas, perhaps 30 seconds to conclude about this new parliament.
Well, it's somewhere between saying everything is probably still going to be all right. And it does matter that we vote. The parliament can put a lot of pressure, it can do a lot of things. It has traditionally been a friend of the issues that are important to universities.
Thank you everyone for attending this webinar. We are going to send you a message before the end of the day with the recordings, the presentations, and a few other things we said we would. So thank you all for listening. And if you want to attend our next webinar, it will be at the 25th of May, just before the elections, but it will be about refugee students in our institutions. So a different topic, but also extremely interesting one. So we hope to see you there as well. Thank you, everyone, and I'm going to close now.